Hospital. 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 Hospital!
What the fuck?
Hey everyone, and welcome to Critique Quest. Today I'm going to be talking about The Evil Within, but I want to do so in reference to a bigger subject, kinda like my Outlast review, the link to which will be on the screen and in the description below. I want to use this game to demonstrate a point, that the survival horror genre must move forward to, well, survive. Isn't that ironic? I should start by saying that I don't think The Evil Within works, and I don't enjoy playing the game. What surprises me is that many of the issues I have with it stem back to my beloved survival horror tropes. So why don't I love it? Survival horror is one of my favourite genres after all. Well, even though The Evil Within inherits a lot of mechanics from survival horror classics, the game doesn't utilise them at all well or fairly. So instead of feeling like a trip down nostalgia lane, this game provokes the same feeling an unnecessary Hollywood remake might, for me anyway. In the PlayStation 2 game Siren, for example, you couldn't kill the Shibito outright, only stun them whilst you made your escape. Here, there is a similar mechanic in that enemies won't stay dead unless you burn the body. However, if you don't have any matches or a torch, they don't always stay down long enough for you to run and hide. So what can you do should you find yourself in that situation? Nothing really, and I'm not sure that's good game design. Also, you have the option to burn some corpses when it's not needed, and there seems to be no rhyme or reason behind which enemies return, which don't, and or why. Again, this doesn't feel like good design. It feels like a cheat to get you to waste matches. The as realistic as you can possibly get hardcore survival elements, like throwing bottles, scrounging for ammo, shivving enemies from behind, all play very similarly to The Last of Us. I'm not being overdramatic here when I say that the mechanics are almost identical in parts, but they don't feel half as user-friendly. The enemy AI, as an example, is so erratic and unpredictable at times that throwing bottles only seem to worsen your situation by riling them up. Movement is a mess. The protagonist is cumbersome to control. He sluggishly turns corners, runs all hunched over, and his attempt at stealth feels more like he's injured. Again, the survival horror of old often relied on the "hold on, I'm too tired to run" mechanic, the Homer.
Game? What's a game?
But it would likely take a minute or two for your character to tire out. I mean, it was reasonable. Here, you can sprint for a few paces before Sebastian's lungs give out. Granted, you can upgrade this as you go, adding measly seconds onto your endurance time with every 1,000 or so brain goo collected, but it all feels contrary and completely unnecessary. And the camera isn't much better. Oftentimes it was stuck just off-center to the right. It's also far too close to the protagonist's back and letterboxed to the extreme, which makes scoping the area a nightmare. Now, someone might argue that this could be a modern equivalent of the fixed camera seen in the generations of old, or that restriction adds tension. And I might accept that argument if the game didn't rely on you knowing the whereabouts of your enemies to either A, avoid, or B, attack. How can I move stealthily around the area if I can't see the area? Now, survival horror often relied on limited carrying capacity. The Evil Within is no exception. But again, the rules quite frankly make no sense. Sebastian can only carry 4 or 5 matches, unless you upgrade space for 1 or 2 more, yet he can store a new shotgun or crossbow. It's Crash Bandicoot logic, like pulling a bazooka out of your pocket, and feels as equally unnecessary as sprinting in its corresponding upgrade. It worked in Resi 4, playing Tetris with your items to try and fit everything into your carry case slots added a lot of extra challenge, but it was fair. Speaking of Resi, Big Boss is a standard Resi fare, which makes sense as this is Shinji Mikami's venture. The crazed guy with a chainsaw, for example, is like that crazed guy with the chainsaw we saw in Resi 4 and 5 and possibly 6, and the small fry enemies are basically zombies. This is fine, but where is the innovation? I hate to mention it in any great detail here, as I feel the games I'm about to compare are like apples and oranges in many ways. But where The Last of Us took a lot of survival horror mechanics, ironed out the creases and successfully brought them into the modern generation of gaming, The Evil Within takes classic horror mechanics and ruffles them up into even more of a mess. It should be no secret that survival horror managed to work a lot of console and technological restrictions of the time to their benefit. But now that everything has become so streamlined, broken doesn't quite cut it anymore. It's much harder to justify a bum feature and pass it off as a legitimate mechanic by saying, "Hey, you guys used to like this back in the day." The one thing I do enjoy is the leveling up system. Not for any other reason than it looks really unique. I mean, you're checking yourself into a ward of some sort and practically volunteering for a lobotomy, and there's something subtly frightening about that. Subtlety is something the game lacks elsewhere, unfortunately. It also helps some that the nurse you converse with is a dead ringer for Silent Hill's Lisa Garland, and that extras and other treats can be found in the morgue. Ultimately, though, this feels like when the movie industry capitalizes on nostalgia. I, for one, adore survival horror, but I'm starting to realize that it will never be the same again, and perhaps that's a good thing. What worked before won't necessarily work the same way again. Everything should evolve and move forward to grow and be successful, and this genre should be no different. We must, of course, respect the survival horror genre for what it was and what it achieved, limitations and all. For example, Silent Hill 2 is perhaps one of the most intelligent games to date, and Doom defined the genre for many. But you can't catch lightning in a bottle twice, and any attempt at doing so almost always ends with what feels like a cheap knockoff. I think that survival horror needs to mature and develop. Sacrificing the genre's integrity and spirit shouldn't be an unavoidable byproduct. Well, that was my sort of review. I hope you enjoyed the video. So what did you think of the game? Do you enjoy the survival horror genre? Please feel free to leave your comments and opinions in the section below. I look forward to seeing you all in my next video. And before I go, I need to say something, as I promised one of my subscribers I would. The self-destruction system has been activated.